This video we are going to show you how to do the big city blocks, and here's pictures of what they look like, and we will get on with showing you what exactly you need in order to make this block. You will need to hoop your battleizer, as we've already done. You also, if you're going to use the wool batting for a little extra dimension, you're going to need your piece of wool batting. Fabric 1, you will need a strip of fabric 1, and you will also need a triangular. In your instructions you will cut a square and then cut them into triangles, and that also is my fabric 1. Fabric 2, we are going to need a strip of solid green, and we also are going to need our backing fabric. We're going to use one piece of non-piece backing fabric. The other thing we're going to need is some pre-stitched or pre-strip pieced sections that are going to be alternating fabric 5 and fabric 6. So these are my fabric 5 and fabric 6 pieces that we're going to sew together. We're basically going to put right sides together, and on the regular sewing machine we are going to do a 1/4 inch seam. And after that we're going to cut the long strip in half and do it again so that you can see in your instructions, and I'll show you how to do it so it'll make more sense. But you're going to sew that one long strip, and then you're going to cut that right in half there, and then sew the 2 strips together. And that is so that we can do our checkerboard section here. So we have some pre-strip piece sections that are going to be in the corner of your quilt block. So let me stitch these strip piece sections together, and that way you'll be able to see what I mean. Okay, so I have my fabric 5 and 6 right sides together. I am sewing a 1/4 inch seam using my 1/4 inch foot. Make sure you have the correct stitch selected. And one of the things that's very important to do to make this all fit is you will need to just measure. Make sure your seam is exactly a 1/4 inch. It's vitally important that you do that, and mine looks spot on, but make sure you double check, because if it is not, if you cut your fabric a certain width, if that's off, or if your seam allowance is not exactly a 1/4 inch, it will not fit into the block like we have digitized it. So please double check that. Let me continue finishing my seam here. Get my fabric lined up again. Alright, so now I'm going to go press my seam, set my seams, open it up, and do a press to open it up. We will sew the seams going in one direction towards your darker fabric, and then I'm going to cut the entire strip in half and then sew it together so that we have 4 stripes on our strip set. Alright, here we go. I have it all pressed and stitched. I'm going to just cut it in half, and then I'm going to put right sides together again so that my strips are alternating. So let me get that lined up so that after we sew it together we got pink green, and so let me sew that. And again, just with a 1/4 inch seam. Alright, so now set your seams with the hot iron before you open them up, and then Press seams to one side, and we're all set to begin our block. Ta-da! All right, time to let the fun in the big city begin. We have our battleizer hooped. I have water-soluble thread in the needle, embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin, and we are going to sew a placement stitch onto our battleizer. And step 2 is an optional step. We're going to add wool batting to our block to give it a little extra dimension. And I press the edges down so that we can do a zigzag stitch without danger of the foot getting caught in the battleizer. And sew in the zigzag to attach it to the battleizer using water-soluble thread. And step 3 is we're going to stitch the pattern onto the wool batting. If you were to skip the previous step of adding wool batting, this would be stitched on your battleizer. Make sure you press your foot in a higher position so that it can accommodate the loft of the wool batting. And you can even use your fingers to kind of go ahead of the needle. Kind of push that batting down. And again, we're still using the water-soluble thread. All right, for step 4, we're going to take our fabric 2 and we are going to lay it right side down. Might have a thread to cut here. Right side down, or not right side down, we are going to lay it right side up. And we're going to center it over the placement stitching that's on there as best as you can, and make sure you have enough extending in each of the corners. At least ½ an inch would be great. And we're going to sew this on here with the water-soluble thread. I'm just going to make sure the fabric doesn't move as it stitches. Ready for step 5. I have neutral thread in my needle, and I'm going to take the large triangle of my fabric 1 and I'm going to lay it right sides down, raw edges even, with the fabric 2 from the previous step, and I'm going to sew a seam. Flip it up, finger press it. I'm going to switch my thread to water soluble and I'm going to sew a tack down stitch. I have thread E in the needle. I still have embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin, and we're going to sew the hunter star points. I'm going to stop it and cut the jump thread or little tail there. I'm ready for step 8 now that I finished the hunter star, and I'm going to take my fabric 1. I have neutral thread in the needle. I'm going to lay my fabric 1 right side down with the raw edges even and stitch the seam. And step 9, I'm going to leave my neutral thread in there, and I'm going to flip my fabric right side up. I'm going to finger press it. I'm going to smooth it out. We won't need water soluble thread because we're not going to do any tack down stitching on the edges, just in the middle of the block. So let's go ahead and do the tack down stitches using that neutral thread. Might be a good idea if necessary, and I think it's necessary for this particular block for me. I have kind of a very generous seam allowance here, so I'm going to go ahead and cut that and trim it to 1/4 inch. And I'm also going to cut, leaving about 1/2 inch on the bottom of this block. The other side looks fine. So let me get out my hoop scissors and do a little trimming. Kind of an awkward angle for me, so, and it doesn't have to be perfect because our seams will be exactly where we need them, but just needed to be a little narrower. Alright, now we're going to do a little bit of embroidery. Let me see what color thread I need to put in here. Step 10 requires thread D and the needle only, and then it's going to stitch some embroidery. Okay, for step 11 is when we're going to add our strip set that we've stitched out prior to starting our block. And the only thing you really need to be aware of is that depending on which block you're doing, you're going to do 2 blocks that start with fabric 6 in the corner, and you're going to do 2 other blocks that start with fabric pink in the corner. So this particular block would be in either position D1 or in position E10 on our Charmed Adventure quilt. So I have it lined up. I'm going to go ahead and I'm making sure that my seams that were stitched here are lining up perfectly with the placement stitch on there, and that's why it was very important to cut your fabric perfect and to get a perfect 1/4 inch seam. So let me make sure that doesn't move. Stop, and yes, this one is lined up really well, so we can go ahead and complete that. And this is so when you get your checkerboard completed that your corners and intersections are lined up properly. Alright, so now we can flip this over. And this is on step 12, and we're just going to leave our neutral thread in there. Let me finger press this and make sure it's laying nice and flat. And it's going to tack this down. And from here we can cut 1/4 inch from that tack down stitch that it just stitched out. So let me do that real quick. And if you don't already have a hoop scissors for trimming things in the hoop, I would highly suggest it. Alright, so we're taking this off. These hoops get any bigger, it gets more and more of a reach to get them back on the machine. So step 13, we're still going to leave our neutral thread in the needle. And this is how we had it, the first section on there. To get a checkerboard, you're going to have to turn your strip around so that you have your fabric 5, or in my case it's pink here. That way you have your alternating checkerboard. We're going to line that up with the edge, 1/4 inch edge that we did before. And now also you're going to have to make sure that your center seam here is lined up with the stitching, the placement stitch that we did in step 3 there. So let me get that lined up perfectly, and it looks good everywhere. We're going to make sure our seams are locked in there on these other 2 places, and now we can go ahead and we can sew the seam. And step 14, we are going to change to water-soluble thread. We're going to flip our fabric strip over, and look at that. We have perfectly matched intersections. We're going to finger press, change to water-soluble thread, and sew a tack down stitch for that. Alright, so now I can trim this about a 1/2 inch around both corners, and we'll go ahead and get our backing fabric ready to put on the back. We're going to leave our water-soluble thread in the needle to do that step. Okay, so here's our block almost finished. Time to add our backing fabric. So I'm going to flip it over, and I've already sprayed a little spray adhesive onto my backing fabric. I have a directional fabric, so if you're using one, you need to be careful of which way you want that to go. Also, if you're going to be doing the pieced half square triangle backing pieces, then you can refer to the instructions on how to place that correctly. And the quilted block video will also show you exactly how to make sure everything's lined up properly. But there's our backing stuck to the battleizer, and we're going to go ahead and take it to the machine, and the machine will baste it on using a water soluble. Alright, we have our backing fabric on, and it's on the machine. I've checked under the bottom and nothing is flopped over. One thing you'll have to watch on this is to make sure that these little pieces do not get caught in there. They're easy to take out and correct. If they do, it's just clipping a stitch. But to avoid that, you're just going to have to just put your finger down so it doesn't get caught in the foot. And there may be a couple places, no matter which direction we make that basting stitch go, it's going to come up on some type of little spot where it could grab the fabric. So just something to watch. So now we have our basting stitch almost completed. For step 16, I'm going to put thread 8 in the needle and also in the bobbin. Since we have our backing fabric on now, we need to always here and out match our needle thread, and it's going to sew some quilting. Okay, so I'm ready for step 16. My backing is on, so my needle and bobbin thread match. Make sure you do needle down, needle up, bring your bobbin thread to the top, and that'll make for a nice, cleaner, neater looking back. We'll let it take a few stitches, and then I'll cut that thread tail. Okay, so we're ready for step 17, and I have my accent thread in the needle and the bobbin. So let's bring the bobbin thread up to the top, and we'll do a few stitches and stop the machine and trim my thread tail. The final step is step 18, and here we have our thread B and the needle and bobbin. We're going to bring the bobbin thread to the top, and it's going to do its final quilting step. Alright, so here's our completed block. It has not been trimmed up yet. I just want to again caution you on the checkerboard that if you're going to start with your, just look at the instructions, and if you do 2 blocks that start with fabric 5 in this position and 2 that start with fabric 6 in this position, then you will have blocks that will alternate the correct way, like this one does, versus, well, you can see this. This one is correct, but here you can see it is not. So just caution you, if you want to get that correct checkerboard effect, to make sure that you alternate your fabric 5, do 2 with fabric 5 starting here, and 2 with fabric 6 starting here. The other thing I wanted to tell you, that the trimming instructions are located on the instructions, and if you're going to put the optional Charmed Adventure border on here, that you would just trim all the different sides using the trimmer by George. If you are not going to, and this is going to be the edge of your quilt, any place where you have the edge of your quilt, it's going to be cut 1/4 of an inch from the basting stitch through all the layers. So please check out the joining and sashing DVD, Join Your Sash Off, and that will give you very thorough, very complete instructions on how to trim, how to join the blocks, and how to sash them, and it has several other joining techniques besides the one that we use here. So I hope you've enjoyed this block. It's one of my favorites, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.